The UHMS Sanctuary drifted through the black void of space, its white hull gleaming under the distant stars. Massive red crosses covered every side of the ship, visible from thousands of kilometers away. Inside the vessel, the hum of medical equipment filled the corridors as doctors and nurses moved between patient bays with practiced efficiency. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, his coffee growing cold in his hand as he watched the sensor displays. He was a tall man with graying hair at his temples, wearing the simple blue uniform of the human medical fleet. Unlike military vessels, his ship carried no weapons. The sanctuary was built for one purpose only: saving lives. "Captain, we're picking up a distress signal," said Lieutenant Chris Bailey from the communications station. The young officer adjusted his headset and frowned at his screen. "It's coming from Sector 7, about 2 hours away at current speed." Jake set down his coffee cup and moved closer to the display. "What kind of signal?" "Emergency beacon, sir. The signature matches a Vulcan destroyer. Looks like they took heavy damage in a fight." Chris looked up at his captain. "They're asking for medical assistance." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew the Vulcans were fighting against the coalition forces, the same alliance that humanity had joined 3 years ago. The war had been brutal, with both sides taking heavy losses. But Jake Morrison had taken an oath when he became a hospital ship captain, and that oath didn't care about politics. "Set course for their position," Jake said firmly. "Full speed. Let them know we're coming." "Sir, the Vulcans are technically hostile forces," said Engineer Amy Rogers from her station. She was a short woman with red hair tied back in a practical bun. "Command might not approve." Jake turned to face his crew. "The Galactic conventions are clear. We provide medical aid to anyone who needs it, regardless of their allegiance. That's why we wear these crosses. That's why we exist." Amy nodded and began routing power to the engines. Chris sent the response to the Vulcan ship. Within minutes, the sanctuary was moving through space toward the distress beacon. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Lisa Bennett was reviewing supply inventories when the ship's announcement system crackled to life. Jake's voice echoed through the corridors, informing all medical staff to prepare for incoming casualties. Lisa immediately began organizing her team. "Danny, I need you to set up Trauma Bay 3, she called to Nurse Danny Carter, who was restocking a supply cabinet nearby. "Kevin, prep Surgical Suite 2 and make sure we have enough blood substitute for non-human physiology." Dr. Kevin Hayes nodded and hurried toward the surgical wing. He was the best trauma surgeon on the ship, having served in field hospitals during the early days of the war before transferring to the medical fleet. Danny Carter, a young man barely 2 years out of nursing school, began pulling equipment from storage with quick, efficient movements. Marie Collins, the ship's logistics officer, appeared in the doorway of the medical bay. "Dr. Bennett, I've pulled the Vulcan biological data from our database. Their blood chemistry is similar to humans, but they need a higher oxygen concentration. I'm adjusting the environmental controls in the recovery wards now." "Thank you, Marie," Lisa said, scanning through the data on her tablet. "How many can we expect?" "The Vulcan ship is reporting 43 wounded, 15 critical," Marie replied. Their medical facilities were destroyed in the attack. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. 15 critical cases meant long hours in surgery, and with Vulcan physiology being different from human, every procedure would be more complicated. But this was what they trained for. This was why the sanctuary existed. 2 hours later, the hospital ship pulled alongside the damaged Vulcan destroyer. The alien vessel was a mess of twisted metal and scorched hull plates. Atmosphere vented from several breaches, freezing instantly in the cold of space. Jake watched from the bridge as his crew extended the docking tunnel and sealed it against the Vulcan airlock. "Pressure stable, Captain," Amy reported. "They're ready to begin transfer. Open the airlock. Medical teams, you're clear to receive patients." The first Vulcans came through on stretchers carried by their own crew members. They were tall beings nearly 7 feet in height with gray skin and large black eyes. Their blood was a dark purple color, and many of them were badly burned or suffering from decompression injuries. Lisa and her team met them at the airlock, immediately beginning triage. She pointed to different patients, directing them to appropriate treatment areas based on injury severity. Danny Carter helped lift a Vulcan soldier whose leg had been nearly severed, rushing him toward surgery. Kevin Hayes was already scrubbing in, preparing for the first operation. Among the wounded was Officer Zrel, the Velkin destroyer's second in command. He had taken shrapnel to his chest and arm, and his breathing was labored. Lisa personally oversaw his treatment, knowing that having their officer survive might make the other Velkins more cooperative as patients. "Why do you help us?" Zrel asked in broken human language as Lisa cleaned his wounds. "We are your enemies." Lisa looked up at the tall alien and smiled gently. "You're wounded. That makes you my patient. I don't have enemies in my medical bay, only people who need healing." Zrel's large eyes blinked slowly, processing this concept. In Velkin culture, weakness was shameful. To accept help from an enemy was considered the ultimate dishonor. Yet here were these humans, these strange Deathworlders from the heavy-gravity planet Earth, treating his people with the same care they would show their own. The hours stretched into a full day of continuous work. Kevin Hayes performed 7 major surgeries, each one successful. Danny Carter barely stopped moving, running between patient bays with medications, fresh bandages, and monitoring equipment. Marie Collins coordinated the supply chain, making sure every doctor had what they needed when they needed it. Jake Morrison walked through the medical wards during what passed for evening on the ship. He stopped to check on patients, offering words of encouragement in the few Velkin phrases he'd learned over the years. Some of the wounded aliens flinched when they saw his uniform, still not understanding that they were safe here. At one bed, a young Velkin soldier was crying softly, overwhelmed by pain and fear. Jake sat down beside him and placed a gentle hand on the alien's shoulder. He didn't speak, just sat there quietly until the soldier calmed down. Sometimes presence was the best medicine. Lisa found her captain an hour later in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She carried 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him. "All patients stable," she reported. "We'll need to keep the critical cases for at least a week, but the others can return to their ship once we've patched the hull breaches." "Good work, Lisa," Jake said, sipping the hot coffee gratefully. "How are our people holding up?" "Tired but satisfied. Danny asked me if we always treat enemy soldiers like this. I told him we treat everyone like this." Jake nodded, watching the damaged Velkin destroyer floating beside them. Repair drones from the sanctuary were already working on the hull, sealing breaches and restoring basic life support. It wasn't their job, but the engineering crew had volunteered. "Do you think they understand?" Lisa asked quietly. "The Velkins, I mean. Do they understand why we do this?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "Their culture is different from ours. They see mercy as weakness. But maybe, just maybe, Officer Zrel will go back to his fleet and tell them what he saw here. Maybe it'll make a difference." Down in the recovery ward, Officer Zrel lay awake despite the pain medications. His chest had been repaired, his arm set and bandaged. Around him, 42 other Velkin soldiers rested in clean beds, receiving constant care from human medical staff who showed no fear, no hatred, only professional compassion. He watched as Nurse Danny Carter checked an IV line on a soldier who had tried to bite him earlier. The young human simply smiled and adjusted the medication, speaking in a soothing tone even though the soldier couldn't understand English. There was no anger, no retribution, just patient care. Officer Zrel had fought humans in battle. He had seen them fight with terrifying ferocity, using their Deathworld strength and endurance to overcome superior Velkin technology. He had been taught that humans were savage warriors who showed no mercy. But this ship, this place, showed him something different. These humans fought to save lives with the same intensity that their soldiers fought to take them. They worked tirelessly, asking nothing in return, protecting even those who had been shooting at their allies just hours before. For the first time, Officer Zrel began to understand why the galaxy called humans Deathworlders. It wasn't just because they came from a harsh planet with heavy gravity and dangerous wildlife. It was because they carried that intensity into everything they did. When they fought with absolute conviction. And when they healed with absolute conviction. The sanctuary continued its journey through space. A white ship marked with red crosses, carrying wounded souls from both sides of a war that neither side really wanted. Inside, humans worked around the clock to preserve life, upholding the ancient traditions of medical neutrality that stretched back to their homeworld's own bloody history. Captain Jake Morrison returned to his quarters late that night, exhausted but content. Tomorrow they would continue treating patients. Next week. 3 days had passed since the sanctuary took aboard the Velkin wounded. The hospital ship continued its patrol route through the outer rim, broadcasting its protected status on all channels. Captain Jake Morrison had just finished his morning inspection of the medical bays when the alarm sounded. "Captain, to the bridge." Chris Bailey's voice came through the ship's communication system, urgent and tense. "We have contacts approaching fast." Jake ran through the corridors, his heart pounding. The sanctuary had no weapons, no shields beyond basic radiation protection. Their only defense was the massive red crosses painted on their hull and the protection of the Galactic Conventions. Every spacefaring species had agreed that medical ships were off-limits, sacred and untouchable. When he reached the bridge, Amy Rogers was already at her station, fingers flying across the controls. Chris had the communications array working at full power, broadcasting their medical status on every frequency. "3 ships, Captain," Amy reported. "Carthon signatures. They're not responding to our broadcasts." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. The Carthons were raiders, pirates who operated in the lawless regions between established territories. They respected no conventions, followed no rules. But even they had never been foolish enough to attack a hospital ship before. "Keep broadcasting. Let them know we're a protected vessel under the Galactic Conventions," Jake ordered. "Try every language we have." Chris nodded, his hands shaking slightly as he worked. The young officer had never been in a combat situation before. None of them had. That was the whole point of being on a hospital ship. The 3 Carthon vessels came closer, their weapon systems clearly active on the sensors. They were smaller than the Sanctuary but heavily armed. Typical raider ships designed for quick strikes and fast escapes. "Still no response, Captain," Chris said quietly. They're locking weapons on us." "Emergency broadcast to all human Navy vessels in range," Jake commanded, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Tell them we're under attack. Send our exact coordinates." Amy looked up from her station, her face pale. "Captain, the nearest battle group is 4 hours away." 4 hours. Jake knew what could happen in 4 hours. But he also knew his duty. Continue broadcasting. They have to respond. They have to recognize our status. The Carthon ships opened fire. Not a full attack, just precise shots that disabled the Sanctuary's engines. The hospital ship shuddered as the propulsion systems went offline. Red emergency lights flickered on throughout the vessel. "Engines offline," Amy reported, fighting to keep her voice professional. "We're dead in space." "Medical bays, this is the captain," Jake announced throughout the ship. "We have a situation. Seal all patient wards and prepare for possible boarding. This is not a drill." In the medical bay, Dr. Lisa Bennett heard the announcement and felt her blood run cold. She looked around at the 40 patients currently under her care. Humans recovering from injuries, Velkans still healing from their battle damage, even 2 Karelian merchants who had been rescued from a transport accident last week. "Danny, Kevin, Marie," she called to her team. "Get everyone who can be moved into the central ward. It has the reinforced doors. Anyone on life support stays where they are, but I want a nurse with each one." Danny Carter began helping patients out of their beds, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. Kevin Hayes secured the surgical supplies, hiding the most valuable medications in case the ship was looted. Marie Collins activated the internal defense protocols, locking down sensitive areas and wiping the navigation computer's memory. Officer Zrell, still recovering in his bed, watched the humans work with growing alarm. "What is happening?" he asked Lisa as she hurried past. "We're being boarded. Raiders," Lisa answered shortly. "Stay in your bed and don't make any sudden movements. Let me handle this." "I am a warrior," Zrell protested, trying to sit up despite the pain in his chest. "I should fight." Lisa put a firm hand on his shoulder, pushing him back down. "You're my patient. Your job is to stay alive and recover. My job is to protect you. Now lie down and let me do my job." The Carthon boarding craft attached to the Sanctuary's hull with a metallic clang that echoed through the entire ship. Jake Morrison stood in the main corridor with his senior staff, waiting. They had no weapons, no way to resist. All they had was the law and their conviction that it would protect them. The airlock blew open with a controlled explosion. Carthon raiders poured through, wearing combat armor and carrying heavy weapons. They were shorter than humans, with thick gray skin and small eyes protected by armored visors. Their commander, a scarred veteran named Throck, stepped forward. "This ship is now under our control," Throck announced in heavily accented English. "You will surrender all medical supplies, valuable equipment, and provide us with your navigation data. This is a hospital ship, protected under the Galactic Conventions, Jake said firmly, standing his ground. You're committing a war crime. Leave now and we won't press charges. Throck laughed, a harsh sound that made several of the human crew members flinch. War crime? There is no law in the Outer Rim, human, only the strong and the weak. You chose to be weak. The Carthon commander gestured to his raiders. They spread through the ship, smashing open supply lockers and grabbing anything valuable. Jake and his bridge crew were forced at gunpoint to move toward the medical bays. In the central ward, Lisa heard the raiders coming. She positioned herself in front of the door, her medical staff behind her. Danny Carter stood at her right side, his fists clenched. Kevin Hayes was at her left, his jaw set. Marie Collins had her tablet ready, documenting everything in case they survived. The door burst open and 4 Carthon raiders entered, weapons raised. They stopped when they saw the patients, both human and alien, lying in beds and watching with frightened eyes. This is a medical bay, Lisa said loudly, stepping forward. These are patients under my care. You will not harm them. One of the raiders shoved her aside roughly. Lisa stumbled but didn't fall. Danny caught her arm and helped her back to her feet. The raider laughed and moved toward the medical supply cabinets. Stop, Lisa commanded. Those supplies are for treating patients. People will die without them. Then they die, the raider said with a shrug, beginning to load medications into a bag. Officer Zarel watched from his bed, his large eyes taking in everything. The human doctor standing between armed raiders and her patients. The young nurse who looked terrified but refused to back down. The surgeon who was recording everything despite the danger. These were not warriors, yet they showed a courage that most warriors never possessed. Throughout the ship, the Carthons moved freely, taking everything they wanted. In the engineering section, Amy Rogers watched helplessly as they ripped out valuable components from the engines. On the bridge, Chris Bailey was forced to download navigation data at gunpoint. Jake Morrison stood beside him, his mind racing. He had activated the emergency beacon before the Carthons boarded. The signal would reach the nearest human Navy vessels. But 4 hours was a long time, and a lot could happen before help arrived. Commander Throck walked through the medical bays, inspecting the patients like merchandise. He stopped at one bed where a young human woman was recovering from surgery, her leg in a stabilization cast. This one could bring a good price at the slave markets, he said casually to one of his subordinates. Lisa stepped between them instantly. You will not touch my patients. Throck turned to look at her with something resembling amusement. You have no power here, Doctor. No weapons, no defense. What will you do to stop me? Whatever I have to, Lisa said quietly, her green eyes blazing with defiance. The Carthon commander raised his hand to strike her. Danny Carter moved without thinking, shoving himself between Lisa and the raider. The blow caught him across the face, sending him sprawling to the floor. Blood ran from his nose and mouth. Kevin Hayes immediately moved to help Danny, checking his injuries with quick professional movements. Lisa knelt beside her fallen colleague, fury and fear mixing in equal measure. Brave but stupid, Throck commented. He turned to his raiders. Take what you want. We leave in 1 hour. The next hour was the longest of Jake Morrison's life. He watched his ship being stripped, his crew terrorized, his patients threatened, and there was nothing he could do but stand and bear witness, knowing that help was coming but not knowing if it would arrive in time. In the central ward, Lisa tended to Danny's injuries while trying to project calm for her frightened patients. The young nurse had a broken nose and would need several stitches, but he was conscious and alert. He tried to smile at her through the pain. Did I do good, Doc? He asked quietly. You did perfectly, Lisa assured him, fighting back tears. You protected a patient. That's what we're here for. Officer Zrel watched silently from his bed. Around him, the other Velkan soldiers were also watching. They had expected the humans to fold, to surrender without resistance. Instead, they saw medical personnel putting themselves in danger to protect those in their care. Saw a young nurse take a blow meant for his superior. Saw a doctor stand between an armed raider and a helpless patient without hesitation. Your people are strange, Zrel said quietly to Lisa when she passed his bed. Admiral Helen Price was reviewing tactical reports in her ready room aboard the carrier Resolute when the emergency signal came through. She was a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. As commander of the 3rd Fleet Battle Group, she was responsible for protecting human interests across 3 sectors of space. The signal was coded Priority Alpha. Helen's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. Priority Alpha was reserved for exactly one situation: an attack on a hospital ship. Bridge, this is Admiral Price. Sound General Quarters. Get me Captain Morrison on the Sanctuary immediately, she ordered, already moving toward the door. By the time she reached the bridge, her entire battle group was responding. 4 destroyers, 2 heavy cruisers, and the carrier Resolute herself, along with their support vessels. Every ship was changing course, heading toward the coordinates transmitted by the Sanctuary's emergency beacon. Admiral, we have Captain Morrison on audio only, her communications officer reported. The visual link is damaged. Put him through. Jake Morrison's voice came through the speakers, tired but steady. Admiral Price, this is Captain Morrison of the UHMS Sanctuary. We were boarded by Carthon raiders approximately 90 minutes ago. They disabled our engines, stole medical supplies and equipment, and assaulted crew members. We have injuries, but no fatalities. The raiders departed 20 minutes ago. Helen felt a cold rage settle over her. Captain, are your patients secure? Yes, ma'am. All patients accounted for and receiving care. My crew is shaken but functional. Good, transmit all data you have on the raider vessels. Ship signatures, trajectory, anything. And, Captain? Helen paused. Hold your position. We're coming to you. Estimated arrival in 3 hours. Understood, Admiral. Sanctuary out. Helen turned to her tactical officer, Commander Greg Palmer. I want those Carthon ships found. Use every sensor we have. Contact our intelligence assets. Check for any reports of raider activity in nearby systems. I want to know where they went. Yes, ma'am, Greg said, already coordinating with the fleet's other ships. Lieutenant Kate Morris, the communications officer, looked up from her station. Admiral, should I notify command about the incident? Already done. This goes up the chain immediately, Helen confirmed. But more importantly, I want a fleet-wide broadcast. Every human vessel within 6 systems needs to know what happened here. If anyone has eyes on those Carthon ships, I want to know about it. The message went out across human communication channels. Within an hour, every human military vessel, merchant ship, and even private craft knew that a hospital ship had been attacked. The response was immediate and universal. Ships changed patrol routes to search for the raiders. Merchant vessels reported any suspicious contacts. Private military contractors volunteered their services. Attacking a human hospital ship wasn't just a crime against the Sanctuary. It was a crime against all of humanity. Aboard the Sanctuary, Jake Morrison walked through the damaged sections of his ship with Lisa Bennett. They inspected the looted medical bays, the vandalized equipment, the empty supply lockers. The raiders had taken everything they could carry and destroyed much of what remained. We have enough supplies to keep our current patients stable for about a week, Lisa reported, consulting her tablet. After that, we'll need a resupply ship. The fleet will bring supplies when they arrive, Jake assured her. How's Danny? Resting. Broken nose, 3 stitches, mild concussion. He'll be fine. Lisa paused. He shouldn't have done what he did. Stepping in front of me like that. He did exactly what he should have done. He protected someone who couldn't protect themselves, Jake said firmly. That's what we do, Lisa. That's who we are. In the recovery ward, Officer Zrell was sitting up in his bed talking quietly with the other Velkin soldiers. They had all witnessed the raid, seen how the humans responded to the threat. The conversation was in their own language, but the tone was clear. They were reassessing everything they thought they knew about humans. The doctor stood between us and the raiders, one soldier said. She could have let them take us. We are enemies of her people's allies. The young one took a blow meant for her, another added. He was not even a warrior, just a healer. Yet he showed more courage than many soldiers I have known. Officer Zrell nodded slowly. I begin to understand why the galaxy fears these Deathworlders. It is not just their strength or their endurance. It is their conviction. When they commit to something, they commit completely. They do not know how to do anything halfway. A Velkin medic who had been helping treat the wounded spoke up. I have been learning from Dr. Hayes, the human surgeon. His techniques are brilliant, but more than that, he treats every patient with the same care. He worked for 8 hours straight yesterday to save one of our soldiers. Someone who may return to fight his people in the future. That is not logical. No, Zrell agreed. It is not logical. It is something else. Something we Velkins do not have a word for. In another part of the ship, Chris Bailey was in his quarters, reviewing the data he had managed to transmit during the raid. His fingers had worked the tablet while the Carthons forced him to download navigation data, sending detailed information about the raider ships to the emergency beacon. Ship signatures, weapon configurations, even visual recordings from the internal cameras. The Carthons had thought they were being smart, taking what they wanted and leaving quickly. They didn't realize they had been documented, tracked, and marked. Chris had made sure of that. Amy Rogers was in engineering, working on the repairs with her small team. The damage was extensive but not irreparable. The bigger problem was what she had done to the Carthon boarding craft's docking clamps. She had subtly damaged them, making the release mechanism stick. It would have cost the raiders several extra minutes to detach from the sanctuary. Those extra minutes meant the sanctuary's sensors got a perfect read on their trajectory. And that trajectory was now being analyzed by an entire battle group. How long until we can move under our own power? Jake asked when he came to check on the repairs. 2 days, maybe 3, Amy replied. The Carthons were thorough. But Captain, they won't get far. I made sure of that. Jake raised an eyebrow. What did you do? Amy smiled grimly. Let's just say their ships are leaving a very specific energy signature now. Something that our sensors can track much more easily. They won't be able to hide. Amy Rogers, you brilliant, sneaky engineer, Jake said with a tired smile. Good work. 3 hours after the raid, the 3rd Fleet Battle Group arrived at the sanctuary's position. Admiral Helen Price immediately dispatched repair crews and a full medical resupply ship. She also sent a team of Marines to secure the hospital ship and document the crime scene. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hughes led the Marine detachment. He was a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair and a face that looked like it was carved from stone. He walked through the sanctuary with a forensic team, photographing everything, collecting evidence, recording statements. When he interviewed Danny Carter, the young nurse was sitting up in bed, his face bruised and swollen, but his eyes were clear and his voice was steady as he described stepping between the raider and Dr. Bennett. Why did you do it? Steve asked. You're not a soldier. You had no obligation to put yourself in danger. Danny looked at the Marine colonel with genuine confusion. She's my superior officer and she was about to be hurt. Of course I stepped in. Wouldn't you have done the same? Steve studied the young man for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I would have. He stood up and offered Danny his hand. You've got the heart of a Marine, son. You did good. After interviewing the crew, Steve met with Admiral Price in the sanctuary's small conference room. Jake Morrison and Lisa Bennett were also present. We have everything we need to prosecute this case, Steve reported. Clear documentation of violations of the Galactic Conventions, assault, theft, and endangerment of protected personnel. The evidence is overwhelming. Good, Helen said, but that's the legal side. I'm more interested in the tactical side. Commander Palmer, what do we have on the raiders? Greg Palmer brought up a holographic display showing the sector map. The Carthons fled toward the Broken Rings, a known raider haven, but thanks to some creative engineering by Officer Rogers, their ships are leaving a very distinctive energy signature. We've been tracking them. They're moving slowly, probably stopping to fence the stolen goods. How many ships do they have total? Helen asked. 3 raider vessels, the ones that attacked the sanctuary. Standard Carthon configuration. Moderate weapons, fast engines. Nothing that should pose a problem for our fleet. Helen stood and walked to the holographic display, studying the projected course of the raider ships. Her expression was cold, calculating. Jake Morrison watched her and felt a chill run down his spine. This was not the compassionate humanitarian who oversaw the medical fleet. This was a battle commander planning a military operation. We're going to send a message, Helen announced. Not just to these particular raiders, but to every ship in this sector. You do not attack a human hospital ship, ever. Admiral, I appreciate the response, Jake said carefully. But please remember that the sanctuary operates under the Galactic Conventions. We're a neutral vessel. Any retaliation needs to maintain that neutrality. Commander Throck was pleased with himself. The raid on the human hospital ship had been profitable and easy. His 3 ships were now loaded with valuable medical equipment, rare medications, and spare parts worth a fortune on the black market. He was already planning which fence to visit first in the Broken Rings. Commander, we're detecting unusual energy readings on our sensors, his tactical officer reported. Multiple contacts, military signatures. Throck moved to the display, frowning. How many contacts? 7. No, 8. Large vessels. Moving fast. The officer's voice became uncertain. Commander, those are human military signatures. A full battle group. Impossible, Throck said flatly. The nearest human fleet was days away. How could they respond so quickly? But the sensors didn't lie. 8 ships were closing in on their position, and they were moving with clear purpose. Throck felt a cold sensation in his chest. He had been a raider for 15 years, had attacked dozens of vessels, and never faced serious consequences. The authorities were always too slow, too bound by regulations, too soft to truly pursue raiders into the lawless zones. But these ships weren't slowing down. They weren't calling for surrender. They were simply coming, fast and determined. Change course, Throck ordered. Maximum speed. Head for the asteroid field in Sector 9. We can lose them there. His 3 ships changed direction, pushing their engines to full power, but the human vessels followed with ease, maintaining their pursuit. More concerning, they were spreading out, flanking the raiders, cutting off escape routes. Aboard the Resolute, Admiral Helen Price watched the tactical display with cold satisfaction. The Carthon raiders had finally noticed they were being followed. Now they were running. That was fine. Let them run. They couldn't run fast enough or far enough. All ships maintain pursuit formation, she ordered. Deploy fighter screen. I want those raiders boxed in. No escape. Commander Greg Palmer coordinated the fleet's movements with practiced efficiency. The destroyers spread wide, forming a net. The cruisers took position for direct engagement. The Resolute launched 2 squadrons of fighters to ensure complete coverage of the battle space. Lieutenant Kate Morris received a transmission from one of the Carthon ships. Admiral, they're trying to hail us. Put them through, Helen said. Commander Throck's face appeared on the display. He was trying to look confident, but Helen could see the fear in his small eyes. This is Commander Throck of the Free Raiders Alliance. You are pursuing independent vessels in neutral space. This is a violation of international law. This is Admiral Helen Price of the Human Navy 3rd Fleet, Helen replied, her voice level and cold. You are in possession of stolen property taken from a protected hospital ship. You assaulted medical personnel, violated the Galactic Conventions, and committed multiple war crimes. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. We are in neutral space, Throck repeated. You have no authority here. I am the authority here, Helen said flatly. Every human warship in this sector is the authority here. You made a mistake, Commander Throck. You attacked our medical personnel. There is no neutral space for you anymore. There is nowhere you can run where we won't find you. She cut the transmission and turned to Greg. All ships weapons free. Target their engines. I want them disabled, not destroyed. We need prisoners. The human fleet opened fire with devastating precision. The destroyer Vigilant put 2 shots directly into the engines of the lead Carthon ship. The cruiser Hammer disabled the 2nd raider with a single perfect strike. The 3rd raider tried to make a run for the asteroid field, but 3 fighters cut it off and disabled its propulsion with coordinated attacks. In less than 4 minutes, all 3 Carthon raider vessels were dead in space, unable to move, unable to fight, unable to flee. Impressive shooting, Greg commented. No casualties on their side. That's because we want them alive, Helen reminded him. Send in the Marines. I want every person on those ships arrested and every piece of stolen equipment recovered. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hughes led the boarding operation personally. His Marines moved through the disabled raider ships with ruthless efficiency, securing each vessel section by section. The Carthons tried to resist in a few places, but they were no match for human Marines who were operating under direct orders from an angry admiral. Commander Throck was found trying to hide in his ship's cargo bay, surrounded by the medical supplies stolen from the sanctuary. Steve dragged him out personally, restraining him with magnetic cuffs. You can't do this, Throck protested. We have rights. There are laws. You're absolutely right, Steve agreed. There are laws. You broke them. Now you get to face justice. Should have thought about that before you attacked a hospital ship. Every Carthon raider was taken into custody. 73 individuals total, all captured without a single fatality. The stolen medical equipment was carefully recovered and catalogued. Everything that had been taken from the sanctuary was accounted for. Back aboard the Resolute, Helen received the after-action report with satisfaction. No casualties on either side. All raiders in custody. All stolen property recovered. Well done, everyone. What now, Admiral? Greg asked. Now we send a message, Helen said. Contact Unity 7. Tell them we're bringing prisoners for trial under the Galactic Conventions. And make sure every news service in the sector knows about it. I want this broadcast everywhere. The message went out across the galaxy. Human military forces had pursued and captured raiders who attacked a hospital ship. Not killed them, not destroyed their vessels, but captured them for proper prosecution. It was a demonstration of both power and restraint, of justice delivered with overwhelming force but guided by law. Aboard the Sanctuary, Jake Morrison received the news that all stolen equipment was being returned. He stood in the medical bay with Lisa Bennett, and for the first time since the raid, he saw her truly relax. They got them, Lisa said quietly. They actually got them. The Admiral doesn't do anything halfway, Jake replied. When she said she would handle it, she meant it. Danny Carter, still recovering but mobile, came to find them. His face lit up when he heard the news. They caught them? All of them? Every single one, Jake confirmed. And they're going to stand trial. Everything they stole is being returned to us. Danny sat down heavily in a nearby chair, looking like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Good, that's good. Maybe it'll make other raiders think twice. That's the idea, Lisa agreed. She looked at Jake. What happens now? Now we get our equipment back, finish our repairs, and go back to doing what we do best, Jake said. Saving lives. This changes nothing about our mission. It changes something, Danny said quietly. Both doctors looked at him. It proves that we're not alone out here, that the fleet protects us, that attacking a hospital ship has consequences. Jake nodded slowly. You're right. It does prove that. And maybe that's important. Not just for us, but for every hospital ship in the galaxy. 2 days later, the equipment was transferred back to the Sanctuary. Marines personally delivered each piece, ensuring everything was returned in perfect condition. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Hughes oversaw the transfer himself. Your engineer did good work, Steve told Amy Rogers as they checked over the returned parts. The tracking signature she added to the Carthon ships made them easy to follow. Smart thinking, Amy blushed slightly. Just did what I could to help. You did more than help. You made the difference between catching them and losing them, Steve said seriously. The Admiral wanted me to tell you that your actions were exemplary. She's recommending you for a commendation. The trial was held on Unity 7, a neutral station that served as a legal center for the sector. Commander Throck and his 72 raiders were brought before a tribunal, consisting of judges from 7 different species. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Lieutenant Chris Bailey testified about the attack, providing detailed technical data. Marie Collins presented her recordings, showing exactly what the raiders had done. Danny Carter spoke about being assaulted while protecting his patients. Lisa Bennett described the theft of medical supplies and the endangerment of patients. But the most powerful testimony came from Officer Zrel. The Velkin officer appeared via video link, his chest still bandaged from his injuries. He spoke in his own language with translation provided by the court. I was a patient aboard the Sanctuary when the raiders attacked, Zrel testified. I am Velkin. My people fight against the coalition that humanity supports. By all logic, the human medical staff should have abandoned us, used the raid as an excuse to let us die. Instead, they protected us. They shielded us with their own bodies. A young human nurse took a blow meant for his superior officer while defending patients in his care. These are not warriors, yet they showed more courage than many soldiers I have known. The raiders violated not just human law, but something more fundamental. They attacked those who heal, who protect, who save lives regardless of politics or allegiance. This is not just a crime against humanity. It is a crime against all civilized species. The tribunal deliberated for less than an hour. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Commander Throck was sentenced to 30 years in maximum security detention. His crew members received sentences. 6 months after the trial, the UHMS Sanctuary was operating in the border zones between Coalition and Velkin space. The sector had seen increased fighting recently, with both sides taking heavy casualties. Hospital ships from multiple species were working overtime to handle the wounded. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the sensor displays show nearby battles. Each flash of light on the screen represented ships fighting, people dying, and after each battle the distress calls would come. They always came. Captain, we have multiple emergency signals, Lieutenant Chris Bailey reported. Coalition destroyer, Velkin cruiser, and a Corellian transport caught in the crossfire. All 3 are requesting medical assistance. Plot courses to each one. We'll take the transport first, then the destroyer, then the cruiser, Jake ordered. Chris, broadcast our intentions on all channels. I want both fleets to know we're entering the combat zone to render aid. The Sanctuary moved toward the damaged transport with its characteristic calm determination. The Corellian vessel had taken a hit to its cargo bay, and 17 crew members were injured. Jake's medical team stabilized them within 2 hours and transferred them to proper treatment facilities. Next came the Coalition destroyer. 23 wounded, including their captain. Dr. Lisa Bennett personally handled the captain's surgery, repairing damage from explosive decompression. The man would live, though he would need months of recovery. Finally, the Sanctuary approached the Velkin cruiser. Jake expected the standard hesitation that Velkins usually showed when accepting help from humans. Instead, the response was immediate and grateful. UHMS Sanctuary, this is Velkin Cruiser Determination. We have 38 wounded and our medical bay is destroyed. We accept your assistance with gratitude. Jake smiled slightly. Things had changed in 6 months. Word had spread about how the Sanctuary protected Velkin soldiers during the Carthon raid. Officer Zrel had made sure of that. As the wounded Velkins were brought aboard, Jake recognized one of them. It was Officer Zrel himself, now apparently promoted to ship commander. He had taken shrapnel to his arm and leg, but was conscious and alert. Captain Morrison, Zrel said in much improved English. We meet again under similar circumstances. Commander Zrel, Jake replied, noting the new rank insignia. I'm glad to see you, though I wish it was under better conditions. Let's get you to medical. In the treatment bay, Lisa Bennett greeted Zrel like an old patient. Back so soon? You really need to stop getting yourself injured. My apologies, Doctor, Zrel said with what might have been alien humor. I will attempt to avoid combat in the future. Lisa smiled as she began treating his wounds. Around them, human medical staff worked on Velkin, Coalition, and Corellian patients without distinction. Each one received the same level of care, the same attention, the same dedication. Danny Carter, fully recovered from his injuries during the raid, was working with a young Velkin soldier who was frightened and in pain. He spoke in soft, soothing tones, even though the alien couldn't understand most of his words. The tone was what mattered. The gentleness. The care. The young Velkin gradually calmed down, his large eyes fixed on Danny's face. When the pain medication took effect, the soldier relaxed completely, trusting this human healer to help him. Commander Zrel watched this interaction from his bed. Your people are remarkable, Captain. That nurse was injured protecting patients during the raid. Yet here he is, treating more patients with the same dedication. How do you maintain such commitment? Jake considered the question carefully. It's not about maintaining it. It's about understanding why we do this work. Danny became a nurse because he believes in helping people. The raid didn't change that belief. If anything, it strengthened it. He knows now more than ever how important this work is. The Carthons attacked you because they saw weakness, Zrel said. They thought medical personnel would be easy targets. They learned otherwise. Yes, they did, Jake agreed. But not because we fought back. Because others fought for us. Because humanity protects those who dedicate themselves to healing. That's the real message that needed sending. Over the next week, the Sanctuary treated hundreds of casualties from various battles. The ship was operating at full capacity, with every bed occupied and medical staff working double shifts. But nobody complained. This was what they had signed up for. News services across the galaxy had begun covering the Sanctuary's activities. The hospital ship that had been attacked by raiders, whose crew had been vindicated at trial, was now back in the most dangerous zones, providing care to all sides. The story resonated with billions of beings across multiple species. A young reporter from the Galactic News Network requested permission to come aboard and document the crew's work. Jake was initially hesitant, but Lisa convinced him it might be useful. Let people see what we actually do, she argued. Let them understand why attacking a hospital ship is so wrong. Education prevents future incidents. The reporter, a Corellian female named Sela, spent 3 days aboard the Sanctuary. She interviewed crew members, filmed medical procedures with patient consent, and observed the daily operations of a hospital ship in a war zone. She interviewed Danny Carter, asking about the raid. Were you scared when the Carthon hit you? Sela asked. Terrified, Danny admitted honestly. But Dr. Bennett was about to be hurt, and I couldn't let that happen. She's my superior officer, yes, but more than that, she's the best surgeon on this ship. The patients need her, so I did what I had to do. Do you regret it? Danny looked genuinely confused by the question. Regret protecting someone? No, never. That's literally my job. I'm a nurse. I protect patients and I protect the people who treat patients. It's that simple. Scylla interviewed Commander Zrel, getting the Velkan perspective. Why did you testify at the trial? She asked. Because what I witnessed needed to be known, Zrel replied. The humans could have abandoned us during the raid. Could have let the Carthons take us. Instead, they protected us with their own bodies. This is not just impressive. It is revolutionary. In Velkan culture, we are taught that mercy is weakness, but these humans proved otherwise. Mercy requires strength. Compassion requires courage. This understanding is changing how my people view the war, view medicine, view the value of life itself. The documentary that Scylla produced was broadcast across every major network in the galaxy. It was titled simply The Healers, and it showed the daily reality of serving on a hospital ship. The long hours, the difficult decisions, the emotional toll of treating enemies and allies alike, the dedication required to maintain neutrality in the middle of a war. The response was overwhelming. Medical schools across dozens of species reported increased applications. Other governments began investing more resources in their own hospital ships. The galactic conventions were updated to include stronger protections for medical personnel and clearer consequences for violations. But most importantly, the documentary changed how people thought about war itself. When you saw Velkan and Coalition soldiers lying in beds next to each other, both being treated by the same human doctors, it became harder to maintain absolute hatred. When you saw aliens who had been shooting at each other hours before now sharing a recovery ward, boundaries began to blur. Admiral Helen Price watched the documentary from her quarters aboard the Resolute. When it finished, she sent a message to Jake Morrison. You and your crew are doing more to end this war than my entire battle group. Keep up the good work. You're making a difference. Jake read the message and smiled. He showed it to Lisa in the medical bay. The Admiral is right, Lisa said. We are making a difference. Maybe not in the way combat forces do, but in our own way. By reminding everyone what we're fighting for. Jake agreed. Not territory or resources or political advantage. We're supposed to be fighting to protect life, to preserve civilization, to defend the things that matter. When you forget that, war becomes meaningless slaughter. Marie Collins had been tracking an interesting trend in the data. She brought it to Jake's attention one evening. Captain, I've been analyzing distress calls and medical requests over the past 6 months. We're receiving significantly more calls from Velkan vessels than before the raid and trial. And more importantly, we're seeing increased cooperation between Coalition and Velkan forces when it comes to medical evacuations. What do you mean? Jake asked. I mean that Coalition and Velkan ships are starting to coordinate temporary ceasefires to allow medical ships access to battle zones. They're even starting to share casualty information to help us prioritize responses. It's small, but it's progress. Jake felt a warmth in his chest. This was what he had always hoped for. That the example of medical neutrality might influence the broader conflict. That seeing healing as sacred might make the fighting less brutal. Document everything, he told Marie. This data needs to reach the diplomats. If military forces are already cooperating on medical issues, maybe it's a foundation for broader peace negotiations. 2 weeks later, the Sanctuary received an unusual communication. It was from the Velkan High Command, formally requesting a meeting with Captain Morrison on neutral ground. Jake was surprised but agreed, bringing Lisa and Commander Zrel, who had recovered and was still serving as a liaison.